Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am showing you how I made my Christmas dress. So this is butterick 6094. As you can see, it's got this nice detail, and I also have added like an extra border on my circle skirt here. So if you'd like to see how I've made this, please stay tuned. Alright guys, so I'm just going to jump straight into this. I've got my box of all the stuff cut out. So I have slightly altered this pattern to have a kitty kind of border down the bottom of the circle skirt. It was more effort than I was kind of hoping to put in, but it'll be fine. It's still going to look amazing. So these are my skirt pieces here. So I'm going to start by joining these, mainly because they're what I've got on hand. So I'm going to take my half circle. So I should have one half circle and 2 quarter circles. And then I'm going to work out which side's the back and then join them down the side. So I've just got like a normal polyester thread in. And then I'm going to line, is it that side or this side? Might be this side. Right, so I'm going to line this up along this edge here with right sides together. And then I'm just going to sew. I'm going to back stitch and then sew down that edge, making sure that everything's lined up. And then back stitch. Oh, and I didn't run out of bobbin thread because I checked that. It just snapped. That's not good. So it appears that I'm going to have thread issues today. I don't have any Resant thread in the colours that I want. So this is actually birch overlocking thread that I'm using. But there's no shop to go buy some right now. And I need to get this dress made because I'd like to wear it this afternoon. I did plan on having this done earlier, but life kind of got in the way. So, oh well. So I'm just going to go back over a few stitches that I already did. And then back stitch when I get to the end. And then we're going to open that up. So you've got one seam there. And then on the other side of the half circle, we want to put our other piece, which is here. Now I haven't ironed this. I did when I cut it and then I shoved it in my little box. It's not a big deal about the ironing yet. Some pieces may need to be ironed before I stitch them, but these bits should be fine. I'm going to back stitch at that end as well. Lift it up, pull it out, and just like bags, we're going to trim our tails. Okay, so this skirt actually looks quite short, but that's because I've still got to add this adorable border on. So I've cut some giant border. So what I want to do is I'm going to put it right sides up, and I want the curve to be going this way, and then I'm going to join them all together. So you just want to make sure that your curve is going around, and then I'm just going to join them, back stitch, stitch to the end and back stitch. You also might notice today I've put in a different, what's it called? Foot. I'm having a mental blank this morning. I decided to do a different foot just, you know, to keep it switched up. So I actually probably cut too much border. I haven't cut the borders the same width as the skirt because I was just kind of winging this. But what I am going to do, I think I just need 3 of these borders because I didn't mass it out well. So I'm just going to join 3 and then join it to the skirt and cut off any excess. I'm going to trim those tails as I go. Now, this bit here you will see. So I'm going to hit pause and I'm going to go and overlock with my serger all of those joins that I've just done in both the border as well as my skirt. So I'll be right back. They are now all overlocked together. So now it's not going to fray when I wash it. So I'm going to start at one of the ends. And I'm going to take my kitty border. And this is the way we're going to attach it. So all I need to do is put this top edge onto here like this. And then I'm just going to sew it down. So I could pin this, but you're going to require a lot of pins. So I'm actually just going to hold and stitch. Now, this is not part of the pattern. I've just decided to add this. So you could just cut your skirt the full length. I just wanted a trimming and this fabric seemed appropriate. Otherwise, you're not going to see any of the cats on the skirt. I'm always trying to stop with my needle down. So that's a third of the way there, or a quarter. So we're just going nice and slow, and I'm just using my fingers as pins to work around the curve. And I'm always trying to stop with my needle in the down position. There's no special trick to this. I don't really know what to tell you. If you're new to sewing, you might want to pin this. And when I cut these, I cut the seam allowance. So I cut it so it should all mesh up very nicely. We're going to get a very cute cat border. Now I will need that fourth piece of border, but I just won't need very much of it. And the reason I had to cut it like this, I could have done a cat ruffle and cut it straight. But I'm not big on the whole ruffle thing. And I thought a ruffle on a circle skirt is going to be huge. Which is why I didn't do it. So I'm going to stop just a little bit before the edge. I'm going to stop about here so I've got enough room to attach the other piece. And I can also French seam it. So if you don't have a serger, what you can do, grab the other end like this, and you can put them wrong sides together. This is just a fun little trick if you don't have a serger. So you put the wrong sides together and you stitch. And then we trim off those tails so they're not in the way. And then you flip this over and you stitch those raw edges into the seam like so. And that is a fun alternative to a serger. So if you don't have one, you can still make clothes that are machine safe. See how we can't see any raw edges? Alright, so I've just got this last little bit to do. And the reason I'm doing this first is because this is one of the things that aren't in the pattern. So if you were just curious about this, I put it at the start for you. I also did it because it's going to eliminate extra pieces and then go back to the normal pattern. So we're nearly to the end of the green, that is. The border I've got a little bit extra of. I could have cut them so that they were exactly even and all the seams lined up, but that wasn't super important to me, believe it or not. So now I can just chop off that excess so it lines up with the edge. And so now our skirt, because I've cut it on the curve, this will now sit down beautifully and flat. So I will need to overlock or serge that edge, but I'll do it next time I stand up. I'm just going to pop it over there and then grab my tub of other bits. Okay. So I've got all of my pieces here with the piece names. So this stuff's called trace and toil, and you can see through it. So when you lay it on your pattern, you can write all of the information and transfer all of these things. So the arrow that you see on a pattern is called the grain line. So this line should always be copying the selvage edge so that the threads of everything is going in the right direction. But I don't need that bit yet. What I'm looking for is the front, which is here. So this is my bodice front, and I've transferred this bit here as a dart. So what I need to come and do is on the back of the fabric, I'm going to line up the pattern piece and transfer the dart onto the pattern. So I'm going to put it there, and then the point is here. So I always put an X where the point is. I find that the easiest way. Oh, I'm getting messy. So then I'm going to put my fingers at those two marks that I did and join the marks together, which is there and there. And then my X is just here. So I'm folding the X, folding the fabric, and then I'm just going to stitch from here up to the X in a straight line. Now, if you want to, you can mark this with the erasable pen that I use or a chalk. And you can pin that if you want to, but I've done enough darts that I no longer need to pin it. So see how now that sits up? So now we're going to do the other side as well. So I'm going to take the same pattern, and because we can see through it, even though it's upside down, I can still see the markings. So I'm going to mark here and here, and then I fold this back to get to the circle point, and I do an X. And then that piece we don't need anymore because I've transferred all the markings. So now that's that bit done. So I'm going to take it here and fold those 2 points together. Oh, I've got an itchy nose. And then I'm going to just pinch, and I'm going to stitch the 2 points. Start here, we're going to back stitch, and I'm going to put my finger where the cross is and stitch up to it and then back stitch. Now with the back stitching, you'll only need a couple of stitches to hold it in place. Okay, so there is the front piece complete. Now if I wanted to, right now I could embroider something on the front of my dress. So I would do maybe a Christmas cat in a hat if I had one. That would look very cute. Right, so I've already done one side off camera because, I don't know, stuff's going on with my camera today. So what we're going to do is we're taking our front and our back pieces and we're just connecting them at the side. So under the arm, that little side seam there, that's the one we're sewing right now. Line it up properly. Now you can put pins in it if you want to. I will pin some stuff on this just not all of it. And I'm backstitching slowly because apparently my stuff keeps breaking. It's not my day for sewing. But I want to wear this dress this afternoon, so I will keep at it. Okay, so now you should have something that looks like this. This is obviously upside down, but it's easier to hold that way. So now we're just going to pop that over there for the minute, and we're going to take our front facing, that's also upside down, so that's front facing, and our back pieces for the facing. So I want the cats to pop out when I fold back those back parts of the dress, so I've put the cats in there. So with this being the top, I'm going to take one of my lining pieces and again join it at that side seam like this. And then we're going to do the same to the other side. That's the top, that's the shoulder, that's the side there. Right. Make sure that you backstitch at the front and the end, and then come along and trim off all the tails. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So now we should have one that looks a lot more spindly. Now these are this is my front midriff piece, and then these two are the sides. So what we're going to do is you're going to have the arch facing up, and then we're going to attach our two side pieces to this piece here, like so. Stitch down the side, making sure we backstitch. You'll notice I'm sewing a bit slower in this video. The reason for that is because I don't want my thread to break all the time. Then we're going to line up this side and do the same again. So I'm going to stitch, back stitch, and then stitch down that side seam. And so now we have, this should go the whole way around your body. Now I'm going to attach it to my front pieces, and these side seams here should line up with these side seams here. But before I attach them, I want to go and I want to overlock all these short things. If you don't have an overlocker, you can use your pinking shears or zigzag scissors. Mine are blunt and I have an overlocker, so I'm not going to do that. A lot of domestic sewing machines also have an overlocking stitch. You could also zigzag right along that edge to seal it. There's lots of options, but because I have the serger, I'm going to go and serge here, here, and then the same on this, and then the same on the midriff, and I'm going to finish serging my skirt. So I'm going to serge the part where I join the two fabrics and the bottom edge. So I'm going to do that, and I'll be right back. So everything's overlocked. I also serged the bottom edge of the lining piece. You could also roll hem it if you don't have a serger, but this is what I chose to do. So what we're now going to do is line all these pieces up. So I'm going to start with the facing piece. And I'm going to, I might even use some pins for this. So I'm going to take some pins and I'm going to stitch or end up stitching all along here. Like this. And I've just cut this a little bit wrong. So I'm going to neaten that up. It should follow this piece here. I need bigger scissors to be doing this. But you get the idea. So, I want to stitch. I'm going to put my pins in the right way. So when I put in pins, I always have them only about halfway in, and I always have the ball part pointing off the fabric. And then I'm going to come up to here, and I'm going to, like a quilt, I'm going to have the excess piece going in opposite directions so that the seam's going to sit flatter. So you want to line up that center seam and then push these to the opposite side. So I don't need a lot of pins, but I am going to put a few just to make the sewing a little bit easier. So I'm just moving my way along. So as you can see, I've started at the little nick in here, and I've gone up, across. I'm not going to sew the shoulder seam, and then I'm going to come around this curve and come back up again here. So line all of this up, like so. And then I'm going to pin. Now again, I normally wouldn't pin this much, but I honestly think it's going to help sew it a little bit quicker. And so then we're going to line up. So this here is our neck seam. So if you wanted a slightly lower neck, if you wanted it to come down a little bit more, you could just cut more out of here or sew it a little bit deeper. I like the high neck on this dress though, so I'm keeping it. But that's just something that you can alter if you want to. I mean, I've already altered the skirt part. I could alter the top as well. So you could just scoop it down to be more round and less boat necky. I probably don't need as many clips. And here's some tails I missed when I was trimming. So then I'm going to come again to this center part, and I want to make sure that this seam is going the way that it's been tacked down. And then I'm going to join that up there and make sure the other one's going in the opposite direction. And then pin it like so. And then again up like this. And then along here, so we won't be doing the shoulder seam again. We're just doing all the longer ones, and we'll be doing the underarm. Lay that down. Trim this so it matches. I found my big scissors. Okay. So now I'm going to start from here. Move that out of the way so you can see. So I'm going to start at this point here. So I'm going to stitch and back stitch as always, and then I'm going to come up to that point, and I'm going to needle down and pivot it to make sure that it's nice and sharp. And then I'm coming up to here, needle down and pivot. I'm keeping with my seam allowance, and then I'm coming up the shoulder and back stitching, and then we're going to stop there and we're going to skip that shoulder part, and we're going to come straight to the other side and go down the next bit. So we're going to back stitch. You can pull your pins out as you go, and I know a lot of people are scared of sewing over pins. Pull them out as you go if you want, or you can just sew over them. I quite often do. You just have to be careful if you're going to do that, making sure that it's not going to pinch. Or you don't want to go too fast because you don't want to break anything. So then again, I'm going to skip this short edge because that's another shoulder part. We're going to join all the shoulders together in a minute. Just bear with me. So this is our neck seam here. stitch and pull it out, trim the tails, put my pins back on my pin cushion. I love that I have a magnetic pin cushion. You can also get like a wristlet pin cushion. I actually think you can get a wristlet magnetic pin cushion these days. Alright, down and around. And continue around. And this is another shoulder part here. So we're going to stop and back stitch. Pull out my 2 pins. Then this is a shoulder, so then we're going to start here. And then we're going to needle down and pivot. Coming down to here, needle down, pivot, and down. Okay. So now I am going to go and overlock this. So what that's going to do is it's going to trim off a little bit of the excess and it's going to seal it to make it all machine washable. So we're going to overlock it and then I'll be back again. That is now all overlocked. So now what I'm going to do is what's called understitching. So what I want to do is I want to open this up as best I can and I'm going to stitch this seam allowance down but on the lining side so that we're not going to see the stitches from the outside, but what this is going to do is it's going to hold everything down on the lining side so that you don't have your facing popping up while you're wearing it. Now it's going to get a little bit tricky in some spots and you won't necessarily be able to get all of it, but we're going to try and do as much as we can. So I'm just, it's a bit hard to show you, but what I'm doing is I am pulling the seam basically apart and then making sure that the overlocked edge is facing the lining piece and then I'm stitching it down. And this is going to help everything sit nicely. So I've just reached an armhole. So I can stop there and pull it out. And trim off those tails. So now when I open this out, you can't see it from the outside, but you can see the top stitching on the inside. So it's not all the way through. This is going to be really helpful around this neck part because otherwise it's likely to lift up like this. So by top stitching it down, we're going to help prevent that while we're wearing it. Okay. So back to here. I'm going to push it under and then start again at the shoulder seam, and I'm just going to push that seam allowance to the back. Now it's a little bit tricky to get all the way to the start, but if you can do it, definitely do. So I'm holding it with my thumb to the side that I want, and then I'm just moving really close along that edge. Sometimes you're going to maneuver everything to make it sit where you want. But it's worth it in the end. So this is probably the trickiest part. always want to try and stop with your needle down so you can readjust it too. Alright. So now I'll show you that bit. So this is our shoulder seam. That's actually our underarm seam that we just did. So once I iron that, from the outside it's going to sit nice and flat like this. And then from the inside, I've got this stitching holding it in place. And so that this isn't going to necessarily flop up. Another thing I'm going to do is once I've ironed it, I'm actually going to take this part here and tack it to this seam to make sure that it holds down nice and flat. But I'm not going to do that yet because I'm not up to that yet. I'm still understitching, so this will be the neckline. The other one was the armhole. This will be the neckline. So we're going to go again. And again, you want to get as close up to that edge as you can. You can get all the way, but it is a bit fiddly, so I understand if you're a beginner and you don't want to. But understitching is a good thing, I promise. So I'm doing the neck line now. So like I said, this will just hold it down so that you're not going to see the facing piece from the other side. And we're going to back stitch, and then while I'm here, instead of pulling it out to show you, I'm just going to go straight on to the other side armhole because I'm already here, or I was. There we go. So this is probably the slowest part because you want to make sure you get it right. It's going to greatly affect how everything sits later on. So it's worth taking your time on the understitching. As you can see, I'm concentrating heats because I'm not talking much. Alright, let's see where we're at. So I've got one more bit to do, but so far I've got a pretty consistent back stitching. I know it doesn't look like it's doing anything yet, but it will once we give it a good iron. So I've now just got this part. So again, we're going to go in at that armhole. And I'm going to make sure that the seam allowance is on the lining side. And stitch. As you can see, some bits are a bit easier to get to. It's when you get to the corners that it gets a bit tricky. Unfortunately, you can't really pin this either. You've just kind of got to maneuver it. And then as you come out, it gets easier once you get out of that other little bit there. Okay. All done. So understitching is now complete. So now we can pull it out and just double check it all. I think it's looking pretty good though. I just want to poke out this corner so it's nice and pointy. Right, so that now naturally will sit pretty much right on that seam like we want. Turn our pieces out here. Poke out our shoulder seams. All right, we're looking good. Okay, so let's now add our midriff. You could iron it now, but we're going to need to iron it again soon anyway. So I'm just going to skip the ironing for now. Now I'm going to grab my midriff. Now the center of this should go with the center of your main panel. So there. And then you can use as many or as few pins as you like. But these side seams here should also match up. Like so. And then I'm going to match. So I'm going to put 2 pins there to hold the seam allowance in opposite directions. And then I'm going to do the same to this side to make sure everything lines up. And then that's probably all the pins I'll actually put in it, because that should be enough to hold everything where I need. Again, if you're a new sewer, definitely put more pins in. There's no right or wrong amount of pins. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. So then this extra bit that we had on the front of the bodice, because the facing came up short, I will now allow us to join the midriff. Now the pattern has 2 pieces of midriff so that you can hide some of the seams. I'm only going to be using 1 because the amount of times I'm going to wear this dress is probably a total of like 5. So I'm not doing that extra step just because it's not an everyday wear. Trim that off. And then we're just going to sew along here. Whoop. Now with I just hit the pin because I wasn't paying attention. Like really hit the pin. I was too busy concentrating on the next part that I'm coming up to. So I'm just going to backstitch there because I had a loop. Now I want my darts to face inward. They won't work outward. They won't sit properly. So we're going to face them inward. Needle down. Reposition everything. So just hold the dart down to stitch over it. And I'm not stitching anymore because my thread broke again. I swear this dress is determined not to be made. Alright, let's try it again. I always cut a fresh end to thread everything through because a fluffy end is much harder to do. It's already not my day. I'm missing 3 fingernails and that's like, I don't know, the 5th time that's broken. So we're going to backstitch slowly. Line everything up again. Stop with the needle in the down position. Pull out my pin so I don't have another pin disaster. Stitch to the edge and then backstitch. And so now we have our midriff section. So that's what we're going to attach our skirt to. Before I do that, I am also going to go and overlock this, and I'm going to go and give it an iron before I come back on camera. So I just want to, when I'm ironing, I want to make sure I'm getting it right on that edge and just press everything nice and flat. It's looking much nicer now that it's been ironed. It looks more like a professional looking dress. Ignore my tails, I missed one. But that looks much neater now. So you can see that the darts go neatly in, and then the seams line up down there and across there. It's all been pressed so it's nice. So now we're going to attach the skirt. So we want to find the center point of the skirt and then the center point of the midriff and join those two together with a pin. So if you've ironed out your midline, which I have, we're just going to go from seam to seam here and fold it so that they match. And then if you pull that out, that point there is the center. So I'm going to join that right sides to right sides along here. And then add a pin like that. Then I'm going to come out to the edge and I'm going to join that one to that one right there like that. And then this midpoint, I'm going to join that and make sure that the seams are lined up in there. So basically, it's a lot of matching seams. Except obviously with my cat border, that didn't match up quite, well, at all. But I also didn't necessarily want it to. So then again, we're going to line this edge up with this edge and add a pin. Now, you can obviously add more pins than I am. You can hold it all perfectly in place. If you're a beginner sewer, that might be more helpful to you. I'm just making sure that the seam allowance everywhere sits where it needs to. And then everything between the points should all match up. So I'm not going to add any more pins than that. That's enough for me because I've made this dress a few times now. So now we're just going to stitch along here. So I'm not going to go too fast because I obviously don't want anything to go wrong. And I'm just going to go and match up the parts in between as I go. Stop with the needle down, and I'm going to pull my pins out so I don't forget later. So I'm always stopping with the needle down. And I'm also making sure that none of my skirt is up in the seam allowance because that would also be bad. And then we're going to back stitch, pull out the last two pins, and so now you should just have all your pieces as one big piece. Now, something fun that you could have done there, now that I've just thought of it then, is add a little piece of piping in that seam to give like a red accent. Would have looked very cute. But you might also want to wear like a belt, in which case you wouldn't want the piping, it would dig into you. Look at either or. You could put in your own mini belt though. You could also right now get a piece of like bias tape and stitch it over that seam as a faux belt. I don't know, world's your oyster with this. This is looking lovely. So we're going to hem it last. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the camera off again and go and overlock this because I'm happy with it. And then I'm also going to overlock the whole way down the two sides of the skirt. So from here, from that seam, all the way down so that I've got no raw edges showing anywhere. So we're nearly done, guys. I have changed my foot to an invisible zipper foot. Now this foot is different from a normal zipper foot. So this is my normal zipper foot. And then this invisible one actually has two little grooves that will hold the teeth of the zipper in it so that you can sew it properly. I love this foot. Great investment on my behalf. I have no regrets about buying this. Some of the other feet I've bought, I'm like, I don't really use them. But this one is awesome. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to, so this is obviously the back part. So this folds to here. So we need to start our zip at the join where this happens. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the zip facing right sides up and the dress facing right sides up, pulling out. I'm just going to snip that right there so that it pops out for me like that. And so what I want to do is I'm going to put this zip right sides over and then stitch down here. So I'm going to unzip it first. This is where stuff can get a little bit tricky, right? So I'm going to unzip it with the dress and the zip facing up. And then I'm going to put this edge against that edge and put it right sides down like this. So right there, and then I'm going to pop this under the zipper. There was a bug just there. And then the zipper will actually hold the tape and it pushes the teeth over so we can get nice and close to the zipper to make it truly invisible. So now I'm just going to hold it against that seam and I'm just going to stitch down. So there's my midriff line that I'm coming up to now. And then I'm just going to hold it and stitch it. So we're going to keep going. I actually think I've got a zip that's a little bit too big for this. I could have gone probably 2 inches less. But when I went to the shop, they didn't have this color in that size. And this was the closest I could get to dark green on the day. So we use what we can get. And so now that I've stitched that, you want to zip it up to make sure that it's not caught anywhere. Now, I know you can't really see that, but you can barely see the side that I've stitched, right? Don't worry about this bit. We're going to deal with that. I'm going to tuck that up and under so we won't see it, like so. But we're going to do that at the end. I'm not too worried about that. This is my tail from the start, so I want to trim that off so it's not going to get caught in the zip. So then we're going to take the other side. This is where it gets a little bit trickier. So you want to go along and make sure that there's no twists in your fabric. And then we're going to come and we're going to line this outside up with this outside, like this. And again, I'm just going to add a little clip here so that I can get to it better. So I'm just clipping just below where this finished, just so that I can get to it easier. And that's my excess overlocking, so we can chop that off as well. Okay, so now these are both, basically I'm holding it like it's closed. So the right side's up here and the zip's facing out. So now I'm going to unzip it now that I'm happy that nothing's twisted. And I'm going to flip this so teeth go up and over and face it that way. Now, before I start sewing this, we're going to do a couple of things. I'm just going to clip that so that it sits where I need it to. And then I'm actually going to zip this back up to this middle line here. Because I want this seam to match perfectly so that you can't tell that there's any crookedness. So I'm going to show you this. So what I'm doing is this seam here, I'm making sure that the other seam is completely matched up. And then I'm going to take my friction texter and I'm going to mark right there. Because when we open this, you're not going to be able to tell where to line it up. So I'm going to zip it up further and I'm going to do the same to the top of the midriff part because I want everything to line up, because that's the difference between awesome and okay. If you get all your seams lined up, it's going to look like a professional job. So now that I've lined all that up and I've got my markings, I can zip it open again, because now you can't, if I didn't have those markings, you can't tell where it all needs to line up. And it is important to do that. So, this line here goes there. So now I'm going to take my clip and put that on that line. You could also use pins for this. And then this line here has to match up right there. So you can even use a pin. Obviously we can't sew over these, but I'm just holding it in place so that I can see where I want everything to go. And then I'm going to start sewing I'm not going to sew at the top of the tape. I'm going to sew where the zipper part actually starts. So I'll show you that up close. So this is the zipper tape, but that's where the zipper actually starts and stops. So that's where I want to start stitching. Don't worry about this bit. We're going to tuck it in and pin it down later. Now, because I'm using this foot, I can still start at the top and work my way down this zip. It just means that I'm going to have all of my fabric in the throat, but it is going to make it way easier to stitch this zipper down. So you can get these for domestic machines. They look less chunky than this, obviously, because they're for domestics, but they are still very cool. So now I'm just going to hold the zip up and stitch down its other side. And I just snapped my thread again. I'm assuming that there's just like flaws in it. I don't usually use the birch overlocking thread for sewing. I usually just use it for overlockers. But shops still aren't open, so I can't even come back again later. And like I said, I want to wear this today. Alright, so I'm just going to go back a little bit and back stitch and then continue sewing along. And then I'm going to take out the pin because I've got it where I want it now, so I can take that pin out. You cannot stitch over pins with this foot on, so please don't try. Needle down, and then I'm going to readjust again. So I'm going to pull this out. And this is why it's handy that I've already overlocked that edge. I can just stitch this on and I don't have to think or worry about it. So I'm not pulling on anything. I'm not pulling the fabric or the zip. I don't want to stretch it and warp it because then it'll get like fuzzy bits. And I'll have like gathers. We don't want that. So I'm just holding it down and I'm stitching as close as I can to the zipper. Like this, and then back stitching. And then we can pull that out and trim it off. And so now, before we do anything else, we're going to zip it back up. This is where stuff gets a little bit twisted sometimes, but we're going to zip it back up and make sure that it fits. Right, I'm not happy with that. I'm going to pull it out and redo it. My zip moved when I started. See how that's not perfectly even? It's like a 1/4 inch out. But that's going to annoy me. So I'm not going to stand for that. I'm going to unpick it and stitch it back on. Obviously, I should have used more pins or clips when I started. I actually should have used 2 pins instead of the clip. I think the clip made it move a little bit at the beginning. But that's okay. I'm going to turn the camera off, unpick it, and then stitch it back on off camera. I'm going to show you how I'm going to stitch this a different way. So I'm actually going to start kind of at the top, but I'm going to stitch from the part where I want it to join and be perfectly matched. And I'm going to stitch up, and then I'll come back and I'll stitch down in the opposite direction. All right, so I'm going to stitch up. No, something's not right. Hold that thought. It's not my day for sewing. But I refuse to not get this dress done. It's going to work. It's going to be glorious. Mainly just because I want to wear it. Okay. Stick that under the foot like that. Forward and back. There we go. Now it's working for me. So I'm going to stitch upwards, and then I can come back and stitch the other way to make sure that everything's going to line up. So this should all line up pretty much schmicko. Like that. Trim it off. Then I'm going to flip it over and stitch it down. Stitch a couple forward and a couple back, and then do the same as before. And this should all be lined up now. Well, and I just broke my thread again. Of course I did. This thread might go in the bin after this project. I'd throw it out now, but I need it to finish the dress. I don't have any more. I reckon it's just got faults in it. But it's fine. It's for me. And like I said, I'll probably wear this dress a total of 5 times. 2 will be this year. So I'll wear it for my Christmas party and Christmas Day. And then it won't get worn again till maybe next year. Or maybe I'll just make a new one next year. I have several Christmas dresses. And I swear I've only worn them like once. Or like 1 year. And then I get new fabric. Which sounds wasteful, but I get inspired by different shapes. Ugh. Come on. Everybody has a bad sewing day. I'm just doing mine on camera, apparently. Alright, let's try that again. I'm just going to do a little bit more back stitching than I normally would to make sure I haven't skipped anywhere. I'm going to go slower than I was before. Alright, and back stitch. Now this should have lined up. I have a lot more faith in this one. And then we need to change out the foot. And I'm going to shut the door because we can hear the television. Hold that thought. Matched up way better. So, now we need to change our foot out. I just use, my screwdriver is actually just a bobbin. Whoops. Well, it was until I dropped it. Undo that. Stick my handy dandy foot in. This is just my happy foot. My child gets very excited at this movie. He's watching The Iron Giant because it's on Netflix at the moment. Okay. I'm going to check my bobbin because I don't want to run out, but we should be alright. And I'm just going to make a nice edge and rethread. Rethreading's not difficult, it's just annoying I have to keep doing it. Okay, so now we want to come to where the zipper is. And I'm going to stitch from the bottom up. Now I want to make sure that this seam where the accent is matches, because that's something you will notice on the dress. So I'm going to pin that and then pin the end. Now again, you don't need to use this many pins if you don't want to. And then I'm going to fold this back and pinch it so that I can stitch up to where the zipper finished. That's pretty much my plan. So I'm going to start from the bottom and sew upwards. Drop my foot down might help my cause. Take the bulk of the weight of the dress and stick it on the table. So I'm just stitching up, and now I'm getting pretty close to this zip. So what I want to do is I'm going to take this little end and pull it, and I'm also going to pinch the zip on itself so that I can get right up to where I was stitching, so that we're not going to see a gap where this ends. Now I'm not going to cut that off because that'll be prickly, but if you look from this side, you should be able to basically not tell where the zipper ends, which is what we've done. So I'm quite happy with that. All right, so now I'm going to hem it because I'm already down the bottom of the skirt. So I'm just going to fold up the overlocking and then plus a little bit extra, and I'm just going to go along and stitch that down. Now again, I'm not going to hoon because I'm likely to break my thread. I'm stitching on a big curve. So you want to make sure that you're getting that curve and you're not making it all like straight and edgy. You want it to be nice and smooth. And you always want to stop with your needle down so that you can readjust. Bring this over. And instead of pinning, I'm using my fingers as pins. So that's why I spread my fingers out so far. They're like pins in these sections. Then I just hold it there and stitch around. Needle down. Oh, I missed a thread. There we go. I usually come back at the end and make sure I don't have extra threads. These ones are just stuck to it. They're not actually attached. They're just, I don't know, gripping on. Needle down. And adjust again. Needle down. Spin it and adjust. You could have also used a roll hem foot if you've got one. Roll hem feet are great for circle skirts, in my opinion. Spin it round. I'm just going to keep going. And then, so probably what I'm going to do just after Christmas, they always do like clearance Christmas fabric. So there's a good chance I'm going to go and buy some Christmas fabric for next year's outfit. If we wore it more than once, I would maybe buy like the seasonal stuff. But I don't tend to want to spend a lot of money on a dress I'm only going to wear once or twice. So I will buy the sale or clearance fabric, which is what this cat is. And I bought the green because it was on like 40% off. And from 3 meters of the green, I managed to get this dress and 2 pairs of shorts for the boys, as well as I've still got some left over, so I can make more sewing projects out of it as well. I could make a matching clutch if I wanted to, except I won't use it for where I'm going for my Christmas party. It's out at the horses, so I wouldn't need a clutch for that. But you could definitely make an adorable matching, like, cute little clutch. I might even do pouchels if I was going to do it, and then add a wristlet strap. So we're just going slowly. I'm nearly back to the start, so we're nearly finished hemming it. But overlocking it first is a good way to get it done. Now I'm getting near the start. I'm going to trim off these tails so they don't get caught in everything. Right. Last little bit. And then go back to the start and back stitch. Now we're not quite finished because I still haven't done those shoulders. But apart from that, it's looking quite adorable. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these shoulders and put the outsides, right sides together. And what I want to do is I just want to stitch the 2 outsides. So the idea is I'm actually going to hide this raw seam by hand sewing, which is why I'm doing it now at the end, because I've got to do this and then a bunch of hand sewing, and I like to do it all at the same time. By no means do you have to do this the same way that I have. I just prefer to hand sew at the end, so I do it all together. Oopsies. So I'm just trimming off all of these taily extra bits to make it easier. So we're going to join this right sides together. Now, if you were feeling lazy, you could actually just stitch all the way across there, except you're going to see part of your edging, which I don't want to do. So I'm just going to take these 2 inside parts and I'm going to join up that edge seam, and that's where I'm going to start sewing from. Now this is going to get a little bit tricky, so you may want to put pins in to hold it in place because it's not a very wide section. So I'm going to pop it under and stitch down and back stitch. And then I'm always going to stop with the needle down, and I'm just going to maneuver this around and stitch as much as I can so that there's only a little bit of hand stitching at the end, because I'm just not a huge lover of hand stitching, but I also want this to look nice. So I'm just bringing it around, and you'll get to a point where it can't go any further, which is okay. Then you'll just have that tiny little leftover bit to hand stitch. But I want to machine stitch as much as possible. So that's what it looks like. It looks like a big mitt. But when you pull on it, what you'll find is that it now sits nicely there, and I just have to hand stitch the back section and tuck it in. So another way to avoid hand stitching, actually we might do that so I can show you. A way to avoid hand stitching is if you get it all tucked in nicely like this, you can actually top stitch in the ditch, which means top stitch where that seam is with your thread, and that should stitch it shut. But you want to do this really, really slowly because you don't want to deviate out of the ditch. Like so. And that's a good way to avoid hand stitching. But you just have to make sure that we've caught all the back. So I didn't catch all that back, so I'm going to hand stitch it. It's just going to be probably quicker than me trying to line that up. So now we're going to do the other arm. So we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to come and join right sides together. And then not grab the lining pieces. And then line up the seam here, like so. And I'm going to start stitching there and then just work my way around as best as I can. So you want to put the bulk of your dress either on the table beside you or on your lap. You don't want it to be pulling here because it'll make it harder to sew. I know this looks fiddly, but it is worth it, I promise. You can only do like little bits at a time. And it also doesn't necessarily look like I'm sewing straight, but it's just because it's such a small area that you have to constantly maneuver. If I can get a little bit more, I will. Nope, I want to do more than that. I think I ran out of bobbin thread. Oh, I did. Okay, so for this little bit, because this is the last bit of machine stitching, I'm just going to get a different colour. Hey, buddy! Hand stitching. So I got myself a needle. And all I've done is I've tucked those edges in and underneath like that. So now I'm just going to come and I'm going to just slowly kind of hand stitch it. You won't really see this, so it doesn't need to be like insanely neat. You could do invisible stitching, but I'm quite happy with just this little loop stitch. So I'm just doing it nice and close to the edge. And so it's going to seal it up. You want to do them fairly close together so there's no gaps. So I'm just going to keep coming along slowly, like this. So we're going to do that all the way along to both of them. I'll just do one on screen and one off screen so that you don't have to watch me hand stitch for 20 minutes. But I am going to show you what we're going to do the zip. So I'm just going to finish this section. So I'm doing them really small. I don't want big stitches and I don't want them too far apart because I want this to hold. So it's barely visible. Like if you didn't know to look for it, you probably wouldn't see it, even though I've done red against green. But if I had have used a green thread, if I had have had a matching green thread, you wouldn't even see these stitches. It'd be completely invisible. But this is the part that sits on your shoulder. So this isn't the part that's seen from the outside. We machine stitch that, so it wouldn't matter. Okay, so now I've done that, I'm going to tie it off. So the way I tie off is I stick it through the fabric with the needle kind of 2/3 of the way out, and then I use my finger to lean against it just to hold this, and then I'm going to twist the thread around 5 times. Why 5? Because 6 doesn't do a good knot and 4 I don't trust. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I pull down so that the thread is as close to the needle as possible. And then I use my nail to hold it in place and just pull this through. And then the knot ends up right at the fabric. And trim it off. And so now that seam is done, and you can barely tell that I hand stitch it. Like if you get really close, you can see it, but even that far away, it's barely visible. So you've got to do that to both sides, and then we're just going to come to the zipper. So we still have to deal with these. I like to hand do it. So I'm just going to, again, wrap this around 5 times, and then pull the knot towards the end. 5's a good knot. So now what I want to do is I want to hold this where it's going to sit, and I'm going to tuck this basically underneath there because we don't want to see these. So it's going to be folded and tucked underneath like that, and then I can just stitch this to that edging right there. Now sometimes zipper tape is hard to get your needle through, so make sure you're using a nice sharp needle. But I'm just going to loop through this a couple of times to hold it down and in place. And now it won't pop up because I've sewn it underneath stuff. So like that, that's probably enough now. So from the outside, we can't see it. From the inside, we can barely see it. And so then again, I'm just going to stab it through, get my thread, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold the threads down as best I can with my fingers and pull tight. So we do that to both sides. So again, I'm going to tuck it up under there so that we're not going to see it. Didn't need to tuck it yet, so I might just hold it there with a wonder clip because I have to put a knot in this end. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I put the tail around 5 times. And then just pull the knot down, trim off the excess. So now I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm just going to stitch this down. There's no right or wrong, really. So long as it's going to hold, you're pretty good. You just don't want this to pop out. It's very unprofessional looking if the edge of your zipper tape starts popping out of your dress. So by tucking it and stitching it, it's not coming out. All right. So that's probably enough. You don't need to like go nuts with it. So then again, we're going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pull that down and snip it off. So that from the outside, you can't even see it. So now all that's left to do is to fold this bit over, because our back has this beautiful accent like this. So what we need to do is we need to pin it down, and then we need to add our little button. So I don't actually know what buttons I've got. I might still have to buy some yet. I'm hoping that I've got one in my big, or 2, sorry, not 1, in my big bucket of stuff. But basically from the zip, this needs to fold out so that we get our beautiful accent popping out of the dress like this. Now on the pattern piece, it does actually have the line where it folds. So you can actually see it on here. You got to remember seam allowances. So that's pretty much where it needs to be. But we just want to make sure. So you want to make sure it's on the right angle, keeping in mind of the seam allowances. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get both of those, get them where I want them, and then pin it down and add a button. So I'm going to turn the camera off while I go and find a button, because I'm not sure where one is, and then I will pin that down, add the buttons, and then we're finished. I have gone and ironed this crease in, and I have picked my buttons. So I've picked some nice big gold ones because that's just what I felt like. And so then I'm going to take the button, maybe not. So I'm going to go up through the button, and I'm going to do red crisscrosses like this. So I'm going to go in one side and then come up and through the other side and do crisscrosses. Now I'm going to do a bunch of these. Even though this button's not functional, because I've used real metal buttons, they are quite heavy. So I'm probably going to go through 3 or 4 times. Maybe not. If I can stab it through, that will definitely help. So I'm just going to do a bunch of crisscrosses to hold both the flap down and the button on, like this. And then I'm going to tie it off, and I'll come over and do the other side. And then if you want to, I'm going to add a hook and eye in here as well. So in the same fashion, we'll just hand stitch it on, and then my dress will be ready for later this afternoon. So that's probably enough of the crisscrossing for that button. So it's both holding this flap down and holding the button on. Now you can obviously do more if you want to, depending on how thick you want it, but I have doubled over the thread. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'm just going to pull that knot down and trim it off. So I will do that to the other side, and then the dress is pretty much complete. If you want to add a hook and eye in here, you can. I will be, just because I want to, but then the dress will be finished. So I hope this was somewhat helpful, and I hope you try making yourself a dress. Alright guys, bye-bye.